Drug traffickers, constitutional conventions, immigration. These are just a handful of the discussions I've been having at the State House. Hi, I'm Representative Greg Chaney, and I wanted to take a few minutes to catch you up on what's been happening. The Judiciary Rules and Administration Committee last week introduced a bill that strikes down mandatory minimum sentencing for drug offenses. I've agreed to be a co-sponsor on the bill, and I'd like to tell you why. While I don't believe that we need to go soft on those who are trafficking drugs into our state and poisoning our children, I don't believe for a moment that that's what this bill does. There is a difference, though, like I said in committee when the bill was introduced, between having notorious Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo at trial and a teenage kid who's made a series of really bad mistakes and gotten way in over his head with the wrong crowd. Not every circumstance is the same. And it's important that we allow the judge who hears all the evidence to make the determination, rather than those of us in Boise who just want to cast a broad net over all categories. Additionally, this saves the state money by not needing to house, feed, clothe, and provide medical care longer than what a judge would feel is appropriate. Last week, the Senate introduced a measure calling for a constitutional convention to propose a balanced budget amendment. I would expect to see a similar measure introduced shortly in the House. 2 years ago, I signed on as a co-sponsor of virtually identical legislation calling for an Article 5 convention for a balanced budget amendment because the lack of control in Washington, it was absolutely reprehensible. However, since then, I've had second thoughts about supporting an Article 5 convention. Even though a convention of the kind proposed would still require that 3/4 of the state legislatures ratify any amendments proposed. I've seen firsthand the kind of horse trading that goes on when one group of people want to get their legislation passed and they need to convince part of another group of people to go along. I don't believe that we would leave such a convention with just a balanced budget amendment. I don't believe we would leave such a convention with just the sorts of amendments that we want. And I'm not confident that the right information would reach the American people about the dangers posed by any amendments coming out of an Article 5 convention. I have little faith that the right story would be told. I have every confidence that for every person who would take to the media to warn people about this constitutional amendment or that constitutional amendment, some other media source would find someone to counter that. I believe that the ratification process would be rife with misinformation, contrary information, and I'm also deeply concerned with just how much earlier amendments, particularly the 14th, have changed the balance of power in the Federalist system. And so, while we definitely need to get control of our spending, we absolutely need to take control of our government. I fear that because of misinformation, because of competing interests, and because of the sort of trade-offs that happen anytime any sort of legislative body meets, then Article 5 convention is not the answer. This week I'll present a new version of House Bill 76, the ban on sanctuary cities. I've spent the last 3 weeks meeting with affected parties, talking to people who are concerned, and scouring the law for other states who have had similar provisions struck down by courts. This new version is more streamlined. It recognizes that throughout Idaho, current practice is already compliance by local law enforcement to requests made by Immigration's Customs and Enforcement. This version has also been given to the United Dairymen of Idaho and the Idaho Milk Producers, who have both indicated their willingness to me to remain neutral on this bill. Both groups were very much opposed to House Bill 76, the original version, as was much of the agricultural industry. And while the dairy industry doesn't speak for agriculture as a whole, the fact that the dairy industry, who was by far the most concerned, is willing to remain neutral bodes well for the passage of this bill. I've never introduced legislation just to prove a point. I have always introduced legislation fully intending that it pass both chambers of the legislature and be signed by the governor. This legislation is no different. And so, I have worked diligently and sincerely to put together a version of the bill that can build a strong enough coalition in both chambers of the legislature to pass and act as a protecting force to Idaho and the cause of immigration reform. For years we've been told that Congress won't act on immigration because the laws we have already aren't being enforced. So what good does it do to create more laws? It is my sincere desire that Congress act to reform this obviously broken and disjointed immigration system that we have. And I would hate to see Idaho or any of its cities or counties serve as an obstruction that can be pointed to as a reason not to act. I'll keep you posted as the bill progresses. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me at 332-1055 or by email at gchaney@house.idaho.gov.